Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, and I am delighted to have in our virtual studio today Dr. John O'Brien. And John is a Ph.D. level trained counseling psychologist who has been enhancing stress management skills in individuals since 1966. And John has a very interesting story about what led him to his exploration of psychology and his career. He pursued psychology at Boston College. He continued psychology training at Tufts University and then later at Michigan State University. And he has been providing high quality services in the greater Portland community, and has a number of distinctions, including membership and leadership roles in the Society of Consulting Psychology, which is a division of the American Psychological Association. And he has been president of the Maine Psychological Association and the managing partner for Mental Health Associates of Maine. And in addition, John is a certified coach. He's done intensive coach training through the College of Executive Coaching, completing a number of programs there. John, I am just delighted to have you as a guest, and I'm sure our audience will be interested in learning how your unique experiences and backgrounds contribute to the work that you're doing in executive wellness, coaching, and in stress management. So welcome. And John, can you say a few words about yourself to our audience?
Yes, and thank you again for having me, Mike. I look forward to our conversation today. I do just want to, if I may, correct one little fact about myself, that I've been working in various roles as a psychologist since 1996.
Oh, 96, yes. No, I
yes.
thought 90. I thought 1966 when I said that seemed like too off. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so I would have been starting my career at age 1, which right. I know I was ahead of myself, but that was that was a little bit. But anyway, so yes, so I have trained as a psychologist and became interested several years ago in using my background in counseling individuals and in teaching to bring practical psychology to the business environment, because I think psychology and psychological principles sometimes can be difficult to apply and to understand, but my hope is that background is a good foundation to, as you said, encourage executives and leaders in health and wellness, broadly defined to mean not just wellness in and of themselves, but bringing that to their role and how that trickles down to their employees in their organization.
John, you have a very interesting quote on your website, which is activatesuccess.org. And I'd encourage everyone to visit activatesuccess.org to learn more about John O'Brien and his work. But he has this wonderful quote. You have this wonderful quote, John, on your site about learning, which is from Louis L'Amour, which is, there will come a time when you believe everything is finished. That will be the beginning. How's that work in your practice today? I think about my work with individuals, with executives, with folks who are in transition, often in some sort of career transition, that it's so important, so powerful to keep learning alive. And yet, in the circumstances that these individuals are facing, they often don't see that as a priority, or it gets clouded by other tasks that are in front of them. So how does this work for you in your practice as a coach?
Great question. Well, I think that I will tell you also that the place that I first really understood this concept was when you get trained as a psychologist at the Ph.D. level, you do a 5-year training beyond the master's, and then you do the last year of your training is a placement. And I was at the Dallas VA Medical Center for a year. And at the end of that, the person who was the director of that training program said to us, "Congratulations on finishing the program. Now your learning begins."
Right.
I remember thinking, what? What do you mean now my learning begins? I'm an expert now. And she was so very right that it's very important in work to approach it with a sense of humility and understanding that we all have areas of expertise, but there's often things, especially when it comes to interpersonal relationships, there's often more that we can learn about ourselves or about how to best relate to other people. So when I hear other people in my field or in the business field sort of say that, well, I don't really need to learn anything else, or I always know the answer. That's when I try to, with a leader, try to gently encourage them that it's important to rethink that, because there's always more to learn about ourselves and others.
You describe your approaches as being an active and engaged thinking partner. And you describe that approach as both supporting and challenging clients. Can you say some words about that? I think it's often difficult in some cases where, perhaps power relationships are imbalanced in certain coaching relationships. I mean, how do you both support and challenge clients?
Well, I think, first of all, that if in working with people, that whether it's in my role as a therapist or as a coach or as a teacher, it's ideally to help people grow. Mm-hmm. And while it's very important for people to feel that sense of support in any working relationship, that it's supporting people sometimes also means providing difficult feedback to them in a way they can hear it. So I have a classic example of how this really came into clear sense for me. In my doctoral program, we were trained to do supervision.
Right.
And one of the first activities that we did was a video that was recorded. This is right at the very beginning of the class when we had no training. And we just knew we had someone that was going to be a difficult and supervisee. And so I was going into the meeting, and I really haven't had a lot of training and supervision, thinking, okay, I really got to be supportive of this person. And in short, these people were trained to do, they were actors who were paid, and they were trained to do really inappropriate things. So the person that there were 6 of us in the class, and there were different variations on that theme, but the person that I ended up working with was very inappropriate in terms of coming too close interpersonally and reaching out and kind of, sort of touching, my leg when they were making a point.
Right.
And I found it at that point, I was in such support mode. I wasn't thinking, I got to really give this person feedback. Eventually I did, but it really brought home the point that whether a supervisor or as a colleague, sometimes we are the people who have the most trusting relationship with individuals and can provide them the feedback they won't get from other people.
It's so true. And 2 of my mentors taught me a valuable lesson about feedback. They said that feedback always says more about the giver than it does the receiver. And if you really want to learn more about people and learn how to deliver feedback effectively, it's to ask questions.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what I try to work on with my executive clients, is to suspend judgment, but you focus on observation and reflection. And I'm wondering how that comes up in the world of stress, which so many people are undoubtedly facing in the world of work today.
Yeah.
How do clients come to talk with you about their stress? And I'm assuming this is distress as opposed to eustress. And
Well, I think that whether these are the clients that I have seen or are seeing in therapy or in coaching, often one of the major reasons that people get motivated to seek out coaching with me is really about trying to figure out how to rebalance their lives. And so they're already primed around that idea of managing stress, or that's one of the things that they really want to work on as a leader, in recognizing that by working on their stress, that will actually make them a better leader. But there are those people also who come for a different reason, maybe just simply around leadership development. But then in reflecting back to them about what I see in terms of behavior or lack thereof in regard to focusing on themselves in the process, that often that leads to a conversation about stress management, self-care, and balanced living.
That's great. As someone who's trained in Lewinian psychology and has done enough work on Lewin, Lewin's famous dictum is behavior is a function of the person plus environment. And as I understood traditional psychology, it was focused on the person, less on the environment. I think all of that's sort of blended in today's world. But do you find in your coaching experiences, I'm curious about this, and I think it's an issue that many coaches struggle with, is a balance between what's therapeutic and what is a more business-oriented or person-oriented approach to coaching. And I think people do struggle with this divide or this tension that can exist between therapeutic interventions or therapy and coaching. I wonder if you can comment on that. I'm sure our audience would be so curious about that.
Well, I think that is a very interesting distinction that, depending upon a person's background, I mean, if someone doesn't have therapy training as a coach, that it may be somewhat easier in some ways for them because they're not necessarily thinking that way. Although I will say that, I sometimes hear or talk with coaches who don't have any psychology background who are, quote, kind of going deep with people in a way that I think could be seen as therapeutic. So I guess to answer your question, which is what you'd really like, is that I think of therapy and sort of therapeutic interventions to be really about present being informed by the past and how to deal with your present and function more effectively in your present by sometimes healing or growing your awareness about the past, versus coaching, which is more goal-oriented and more presently oriented with an eye to the future about how to build on one's experience and be better as a person, better as a leader, to enhance their role as an executive.
Oh, so helpful, because it's a way that I frame my practice, my coaching practice, which is around helping people with their goal-directed behaviors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. So that's a nice distinction. And you have this mission around activating insight to enhance success and stress management. Yes. Do you think generally overall executives don't do a good job of managing stress, or how do you think about that? I mean, given your experience.
Well, I think that, I don't like to generalize.
Right.
Like, all those executives.
Yeah, perfect.
So there is that reality. I think that in general, in today's business climate, from what I see, people are being expected to do more with less.
Yes.
Less people, less resources. And so that in that way, the environment has shifted somewhat. And embedded in it is a greater amount of stress. So I think that, I think people are kind of all over the map as far as people who are leaders in terms of how much they're able to focus on stress and stress management. I do think that there is more awareness than there was even 10 years ago. But I think as the more complex the organization and the more demanding a role is, I will say, I think the more difficult it is to focus on self-care and stress management, and the more likely people are going into unhealthy behaviors as a way to find balance.
Oh, thank you. That's so helpful. I love how you talk about your values. Right up front, and the values of integrity, diversity, compassion, and humor. And my last book was Integrity by Design, Working and Living Authentically. And when I think about integrity, I think about the real deal. I think about the genuine article. And later, thinking about authenticity relative to congruency and the alignment of what we say and do, and even better, what we think, say, and do. How did this value become figural for you? You list, I believe, 4 values that drive your work or that drive your interests: the value of integrity, the value of diversity, the value of compassion, and the value of humor. How does integrity in particular shape the work that you do?
I guess that's what I want from other people in my life,
right?
Whether it's personal or professional relationships, people that are providers for me. As I think about, as you were saying, integrity, the next word that comes to my mind is authenticity. So, right. and genuineness. And so I think that that is really a core of the most effective relationships that we have is that sense of trustworthiness. And so I think that forms a foundation for everything else that we do, whether as leaders or coaches or teachers, is that sense of showing up as who you are, and then what that means in relationships with other people.
Those words, they hit all of the buttons for me, and I think for many members of our audience: integrity, authenticity, and trust. Because trust is the foundation for building a relationship where people can bring who they are to what they do, or bring the best of themselves to what they do. And yet, we have so many, managers and employees who, when I ask, can you be more authentic at work or at home? The answer is pretty predictable, that people feel they're more authentic at home than they are at work. And what can we do to shift that, in our world so that we do create, more inclusive environments for people?
Well, I think it would be interesting to follow up with people, which I usually will do, when they say they can't be as authentic as they would like to be at work, to understand a little bit more about why that is. Because we can tell people, it's really important to be yourself no matter where you go. But if the environment they are going into is not accepting, or is judgmental, or doesn't kind of have a sense of psychological safety, a sense that that there's support, that people are okay to be themselves, then people are not going to be able to do that. So, I think in part, it's really important for leaders to be looking at what organizations can do to create environments that allow people to be more authentic.
And
go ahead,
please. And I was just thinking about trust in that context.
Yes, right. Again, that's where I think trusting that I can show up as who I really am. And while people may, not agree, or may have a difference of opinion or a different experience, that there is this foundation that everyone can be accepted.
And In addition to diversity, I mean, valuing the difference in individuals based on life experiences and understanding that as sources of stress resilience, how do we, work on creating more inclusiveness as well?
Well, I think that certainly having opportunities within the workplace to be learning about various people's various backgrounds. I mean, I know larger employers have employee resource groups, and so sometimes that can be a great resource for the organization itself to be understanding more about the experiences. And throughout the year there can be celebrations for people from various cultural or religious or spiritual backgrounds. And I think if those times could be opportunities for organizations to educate the people in the organization about someone from various background. I think that's certainly something that could be a way to enhance the diversity awareness in the environment. Because again, I think that we are all works in progress when it comes to really trying to understand other people's experience. And when someone gets a little information about someone who's from a different perspective, and they think, "Oh, now I know everything I need to know about people who are Irish," to use my background or something. That that's dangerous because there's always more to learn.
And I want to talk about the transition that from, I don't know if it's an abrupt transition. I mean, you can describe it as you wish, but the transition to move into coaching as a professional service, in some ways, it's a natural extension of what you were doing as a psychologist. And can you give me and our audience some insight as to the transition into coaching and away from a purely therapeutic endeavor?
Yeah, well, I think that the motivation in part for this transition comes from my own experience of being the son of an executive who struggled with self-care and self-awareness of that. And it was a very highly stressful job that unfortunately led to a major heart attack when he was 49, and he was unable to work ever after that and died very young at 63. So, I sort of had a front row seat to the unfortunate effects of what stress in the business environment can do to people. So that was always kind of, I think, part of my drive to go into the field of psychology. But I think that I'd always had an interest in applying the skills and knowledge that I had in my work as a psychologist to a wider audience than just a usual kind of one-to-one or maybe consultations with smaller groups. And that I also felt like it was important to get specific training in that perspective, just to help me make distinctions between psychotherapy and coaching. And so, the transition has been, is ongoing because I still have both roles that I do. But I think that it's, yes, as you said, it feels to me like it's a natural extension or building on this other work, but bringing it to the masses, bringing it out of the therapy room more to groups and individuals in businesses.
Yes, and you though have an expertise which is distinguishable from so many. I think about the work that you did in positive psychology, psychological health and wellness coaching. And I think while there are probably a lot of people in the coaching world who work on these issues, and many quite effectively on the issues of health and wellness, you bring a special level of expertise. And can you talk about the intersection of positive psychology and health and wellness coaching and what that means for you and your clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think, and this is where the work of psychology is is developing, or has been developing. I think for so long, the assumption has been that psychology's expertise really has to do with dysfunction and disease and healing those. But there also is this other side to psychology that's really at the roots of counseling psychology, which is my background. That's what I was trained in, which is on enhancing positivity or enhancing strengths. And so that the interventions that are guided by a positive psychology perspective are about, rather than focusing on problem, the attention is on possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, things like gratitude awareness and the power that a daily or regular practice of gratitude can provide. So that type of intervention can also be useful when it comes to health and wellness, because by actually focusing on the positivity of something like, for example, gratitude, it's been shown that has many benefits, both psychologically as well as physiologically, that come from that. So by focusing on some of these other skills and strategies, that can help people to be more balanced in regard to their health, and obviously, which by extension then means more balanced in their relationships and better leaders.
And John O'Brien, given the expertise that you have in wellness coaching, counseling, psychology, how is it that people find out about Activate Success and about your work?
Well, I'm bringing my message to the masses.
I see. Perfect.
So, I mean, things like this, your generousness with having me as a guest on your podcast. So I'm certainly doing that. I've been publishing a lot on LinkedIn. People can find me there. People can, and just to clarify, I'm in Portland, but when I say Portland, people often assume, oh, Oregon? And I have to say, no, we're the other Portland. We're the smaller Portland, but let the record show we are the Portland that Portland, Oregon got its name from. So,
I didn't know that.
With apologies. Yes, with apologies to people in Portland, Oregon.
Right.
But that is a fact. So yes, I'm going to my website. I have a mailing list. I do a lot of blogging on various practical concepts in applying some of the psychological skills to individual life or professional life. So I'd be happy if people want to surf on over to my website and sign up to get on my mailing list.
Oh, that would be great. And I'd encourage folks to do that. I mean, given John's the unique intersection and breadth of his skills. John, as you think about authenticity and having people bring more of who they are to what they do, this drive towards authentic behavior is often formed on the basis of trust. And what I've observed is that if I don't trust you, I won't think you have integrity. And if I don't think you have integrity, I won't trust you. And that trust, once lost or once diminished, it's very difficult to regain it.
Absolutely.
And what are the kinds of things that we can do as coaches, to help people with that? I mean, often, we're working one-on-one with an individual. Sometimes we may do some 360s or gather some extant data or additional data. But how is it? I mean, I think about it in terms of, my work with individuals, working with candor, working out of many of the, values that are similar to yours, a belief in that people are in process, a belief that everyone deserves to be loved. I mean, I operate out of these humanistic principles. And yet I realize there's another part of the world that doesn't do this. And in fact, it can be a pretty dog-eat-dog world.
Right.
So how do you reconcile all of this, or how do you help us to advance our understanding of helping people to be, particularly leaders, to lead authentically?
Well, I think that, first of all, I will say that the type of coaching that I'm doing with someone matters, because I've certainly sometimes been in situations of needing to do work with people where it's more remedial coaching, where there's been a problem with behavior that's been identified and people are referred for changing problematic behaviors, and if they don't, that they may no longer be employed. So
sure, that is one of the drivers of coaching.
Exactly. And that's, and I think some people come to that type of coaching either with shame or with resentment and anger. And what I try to get people to think about is that how they approach that coaching is their choice. So if they just kind of want to approach it from a place of shame or anger, that's going to get in the way of them being able to grow. Mm-hmm. And can they use that type of coaching still as an opportunity to make things better for themselves and be a better leader? That I think there are few, if any, people who would show up and think, yeah, I have no interest in trying to improve my ability as a leader.
Very few.
I've not met anybody yet.
Right. Very few. I haven't met them either.
Of course, they may be out there, but they are the rare bird, right? But for people who are approaching, coaching because they really want leadership development, I try to talk about what the benefits of, authenticity and trustworthiness are. We humans are social creatures, mm-hmm. and that the behavior of one person is going to have an impact on someone else, both verbally and non-verbally. And mm-hmm. so helping people see that by working on, growing their ability to be trustworthy, that's going to have many payoffs for them internally, but also externally, and also for the organization.
I'd love to explore this concept of shame just briefly with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think your example arose out of those who come into the coaching arena because of certain behaviors that their organization or someone else wants to see changed or developed. Perhaps mm-hmm. it's an individual, just by way of example, who might, fly off the handle with different groups that he or she or they don't need to do. Mm-hmm. Or they might have some other aberrant behaviors that mm-hmm. he or they don't need to do. I often, in some of the work, most of my clients are usually in some point of transition, in transitioning mm-hmm. from one job to another, or as you described. And for many clients, there's a degree of shame that enters into it. I think about those clients in particular who have failed at their assignments or their roles. Maybe they were first-time VP and they didn't make it. And there is a lot of shame that I think people bring into that circumstance. And my job is often to tell these very smart people that I work with and quite talented people is that they will get another job.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. It may not be exactly what they want or pay as much or pay as well or whatever, but another job will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I find that, these people who have achieved, PhDs, postdoc work, accomplished careers, significant contributions, the scientists and distinguished engineers that I work with. And there is still a lot of shame associated with job loss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surprising to me, given how disloyal most employers are. I mean, jobs don't love people back, as one of my mentors says.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So how do we deal with that in a non-therapeutic way? As coaches, I mean, most of us don't have your level of training or, level of education. So how would someone, like myself, help people effectively with these kinds of challenges if you can, put that into a few bullets in a relatively short period of time?
Okay. Well, I think that I would think about a couple of things, at least one thing that comes to mind most immediately, that reframing the experience. Well, first of all, that none of us like to not have success, to be unsuccessful. That especially for, and sometimes, as you identified, there are people who have been very successful academically or professionally, but then they get put into a role that for various reasons either isn't a good fit for them in terms of their skills, or they weren't given the amount of support they needed to develop the skills necessary. And so they're not successful. So I try to talk to people when someone comes in and tells me that they failed at a position. I always try to help them to reframe that into a more non-judgmental way. I mean, yes, they weren't successful, but that for various reasons they weren't successful in the position versus failing at the role.
Right.
Because failure also really is can be about identity. And that's where the shame is rooted. Like, I'm bad, I'm wrong. That was all about me. My lack of success was all about me. Now, and maybe there was a good part of it that was, but to also think about the fact that there may have been things going on organizationally that didn't provide the person with a firm foundation. So I think approaching it in a non-judgmental way when possible, and in that way trying to be realistic about what can you learn from that experience, and how can you, moving forward, approach the next job. And yes, as you said, encouraging people to know there will be a next job. When they're in their next job, how can they use what they learned in that role to benefit them in their future position?
Oh, I love that, John, because that's another way of extending the relationship that we develop with these folks. If it's over 12 coaching sessions or, sometimes shorter, sometimes more. It's a great way of reconnecting and I think recognizing the humanness of our work with others.
Exactly.
That I didn't care about you just when you were paying me. I care about you, beyond that transaction.
Yeah, right.
And isn't that, perhaps that's the way that, as coaches, as consultants, we demonstrate our leadership. One of my mentors, one of my early mentors was Warren Bennis. And Warren wrote a lot on leadership in a couple New York Times bestsellers. And, at one point he said, never has so much been written about so little. He was cynical at that point about leadership. And maybe it does, boil down to two things. That in order to lead effectively, and you can do this from, any position, you don't have to have a designated position, you have to care. And the second thing you have to do is you have to act on those cares. And I've watched people tolerate a lot of, bad behaviors from their bosses, but they stick with them because of this innate capacity of their caring and their willingness to act on those cares. How do you think that factors into leadership and authenticity today? These factors about caring and acting, are those accurate descriptors of leaders?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because I think that what you're describing is empathy. Being able to really put yourself into someone else's shoes. And then acting on that sense of caring really is about relationship management. And the way I think about what you're describing is how important concepts of emotional intelligence are when it comes to being a leader. And in fact, some people say that an EQ or emotional intelligence is even more important than IQ.
Yes.
So, yes, acting on that caring and for people to really experience that the leader has a great amount of empathy is really important.
Oh, that's great. John O'Brien, you have so many wonderful gifts that you're bringing to the world and bringing to your clients. And perhaps it is acting out of this foundation of your values of integrity and diversity and compassion and humor that creates your ground so that it is expansive and in other words, I mean, very helpful to others. I often talk about, leading with your values or starting with your values. And I think people go, oh, yeah, I agree. And, I'm never really sure that we get to some of these questions about how can I incorporate these values into my everyday actions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wonderful to see that you're leading with these values of integrity, diversity, compassion, and humor, that they set a tone and a foundation for your work. John, just as we begin to wrap up our conversation today and think about your work and your vision around connecting clients to their inner strengths to refine stress resilience and ultimately transform goals into realities, what, as we enter a change of years and all kinds of transitions that are often figural for people at this time and season of year, would you have any advice or recommendations that might help either coaches, people who are helping others with these, or coachees who may be struggling with some of the issues that we described?
Yeah, so I think about three pieces of advice I would have. That your work and this show is really about, authenticity. And so one thing we mentioned it a few minutes ago, but that authenticity, it works best when it happens on the foundation of emotional intelligence. Because that's so important, I think, to have that, self-awareness and empathy and monitoring, behaviors with others. That's sort of one thing. I think understanding that authenticity has, benefits both internally, in terms of, how we think and feel about ourselves, as well as externally. And so helping clients aim for authenticity is going to have a lot of benefit for them in terms of self-acceptance or self-esteem. And then that creates that environment in the workplace. And I guess the final thing I would say is, that I talk to people all the time about how authenticity can be a real strength, but, any strength can be overused. So authenticity can also be a derailer as a leader.
There are authentic jerks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, the argument is, well, I'm being authentic.
All right.
And that's, and Mike, that's what you want me to be, right? Is you want me to be authentic. But, being too honest or too direct, or I've worked with some leaders who have shared too much of their personal reactions, both men and women, sharing too many of their personal reactions in the work environment, and how that can really undermine their authority and also kind of undermine their work. So just being aware of it, it's possible to be, quote, too authentic at times. And so just being careful of that.
Well, it's one thing to, think that some of your colleagues are morons. It's another thing to say it out loud. And then wonder why, you're not on the team anymore.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Such great points, John. So it's just been a delight speaking with John O'Brien. You can find out more about John O'Brien at activatesuccess.org. Your ability, John, to combine all of your interests, your passions, your mission, your vision, your values in such a clear and deliberate fashion is so refreshing and so inviting, I think, to folks who are looking to work with a coach. I mean, I love the idea of at least, knowing formally up front whom I'm getting involved with. And I do a wonderful job at presenting your work.
Oh, well, so I so appreciate you having me, Mike, and I want to thank you for this opportunity and for the podcast too, because I think helping people be, more authentic, that's something that we can all benefit from. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, we'll leave it on that note with John O'Brien, Dr. John O'Brien, an expert coach, an expert therapist, an expert counseling psychologist, and an advocate for managing our health and wellness in the workplace and at home. It's been a delight to have Dr. John O'Brien as a guest on the Authentic Change podcast. And until our next episode, everyone, please stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.